Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see you, so many of you participating in our webinar about farm to fork. So we are talking today about the whole farm to fork strategy. I welcome you and I hope you will enjoy our presentations and just a few comments. We have provided a lot of room for discussion, so you are really warmly invited to participate in the discussion and to raise your voices because we wanted to have it more lively than just having a kind of frontal presentation from one to other. So we want more a workshop than a webinar. And yeah, so I think we can start if you are all ready. I hope you feel well. I hope you are all healthy and enjoying the last day before the next weekend. That does not change much in those days. So every day is more or less the same. Yeah, okay. So I will start then to give you a short introductory presentation. And we are going through the sorry. I'm just looking for my first slide. And my computer is unfortunately quite slow today, but it will hopefully obey my commands. So, oops. Here we are. So, nutrients in EU's farm to fork policy. This is what I will tell you. So giving you a frame for our joint actions, we have on one hand the transgressing of the planetary boundaries. We have, sorry. Oops. Unfortunately, my computer. You see my screen? Yes.
Yes. Yes, we see it, Ludwig.
So my screen does not move anymore. Sorry, it's not Zoom. It's my notebook here. So for some reason. Yeah. So again, sorry. I do not know what my PowerPoint has. It jumps around. Can you see these changes? Yes. So
Yes.
P and N transgressing planetary boundaries. We have not achieved good water quality status. We have, however, achieved nutrition and food and feed for most of our global population. So we see that fertilizers are indispensable. And finally, we have the European Green Deal with a farm to fork strategy, with agriculture driven or governed to become a greenhouse gas sequestration facility instead of an emitting activity. We are caring for biodiversity, for rural economy, and for bio-based industries. So farm to fork strategy, our subject for today, is at the heart of the Green Deal. It's central to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. It is governed to achieve robust and resilient food system, improve lifestyles, health and environment, reduce excess fertilization, increase organic farming, improve animal welfare, and reverse the biodiversity loss. So we want to build a food chain that works for customers, for the whole value chain and climate and the environment. And it has, at several instances, a direct impact on nutrients. We want to develop new green business models, as already mentioned, for example, by carbon sequestering farming. We want to develop a circular bio-based economy focusing on nutrient recovery and recycling. We want to abate soil, air, and water pollution by addressing the excess of nutrients, and in particular here, nitrogen and phosphorus. We have some bold targets, reducing nutrient losses by 50% by 2030. That, this is a statement of the Commission, means in this general view, reducing nutrient use by 20%, and we want to develop an integrated farm nutrient management plan and transfer 25% of the European agriculture to organic farming. We want to ensure a sustainable food production, and it has an impact on nutrients, of course, and the overall departure frame is that agriculture is approximately responsible for 10% of greenhouse gases, and of these 10%, 70% come from livestock. So we want to reduce the use of critical feed materials, for example, soy from deforested land. We want to develop alternative feed materials like insects, like marine feedstock, algae, fish waste. We are currently discussing a new CAP framework, Common Agricultural Policy, within which at least 20, maybe 30, maybe even more % of the first pillar payments are assigned to eco schemes. When we talk about eco schemes, we talk about sustainable agricultural practices such as precision agriculture, agroecology, agroforestry, and we will get this, hopefully, this farm sustainability tool for nutrients. Nutrient targets are also included in the biodiversity strategy, sustainable aquaculture, including nutrient recycling, healthy sustainable diets, and reducing food waste and loss are the additional goals. And all that is flanked by transition enabling measures like Horizon 2020, with now the Open Green Deal call, with a new Horizon Europe framework program, within which about 10 billion euro are dedicated on research and innovation regarding food and bioeconomy and national resources and so on. We have the mission caring for soil is caring for life. We want to have 75% of soils healthy by 2030. We have the starfish mission, restore our oceans and waters. We have the partnership for a circular bio-based economy. This is following the bio-based industries joint undertaking. We have investment instruments like the European Regional Development Fund and Invest EU that should foster investments in the agro-food network. And we have the Farm Sustainability Data Network. And in addition, we have different regulatory activities like the new fertilizing product regulation that will be in effect from 16th of July of 2022. We have the exemption for digestate already published by the end of last year, 1 year ago. We have the organic farming regulation that is now postponed, but is also underway. And we have studies on contaminants like the EFSA acceptable daily intake, providing or looking for a safe limit for phosphorus in diets. We have EFSA studying risk reduction measures for some population at higher risk. And we have some dossiers are still stuck, like animal feed, animal byproducts, diet, and food products. And we have, of course, also related policies of other sector, like the water sector with the Water Framework Directive, REFIT currently. We have the Urban Wastewater Directive and the Sewage Sludge Directive. And also an exploratory study on prospective elements like risk-posing pollutants. We have a circular economy, new circular economy action plan currently starting. We have a chemical strategy for a sustainable toxic-free environment. We have a zero pollution action plan, and we have phosphate rock and P4 still on the critical raw materials list. And yeah, this is my framework setting for this meeting, and I thank you for your attention. And I pass on the floor. Is Andrea here?
Yes, I am here.
You are here? Okay, so I will now pass on to your presentation.
I have only an oral presentation, so
okay. Then it's fine. Then I will stop my screen sharing, and here you are. Welcome. So please, the floor is yours. Continue with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting event, which in fact is really timely, and given that it's a very cross-cutting topic that concerns a lot of different policy streams. I will give you just a brief point of view from my side on the policy side. I'm Andrea Vettori, I'm the Deputy Head of the Land Use and Management Unit in DG Environment in the European Commission. And I wanted to start simply by where Ludwig stopped, basically explaining how the approach of the Commission towards these targets that was set through the Farm to Fork and Biodiversity Strategy that were adopted in May. The two strategies are mutually reinforcing, and the aim is bring together nature, farmer, business, and consumers for a jointly work towards a competitively sustainable future. In line with the EU Green Deal, they propose ambitious EU actions and commitments to halt biodiversity loss in Europe and worldwide and transform our food system. This is, of course, part of a much broader work at global level. This is part of the efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and targets by 2030, but also the climate targets and the work on more broadly achieve sustainability at global level, and prepare, of course, they will be part of the position of the EU to lead negotiations in the CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity, that was supposed to take place right now, but has been postponed to next year. So there are these two strategies. They have a number of common targets, and one of them is the nutrient pollution target. And the target says, as it was presented, that the Commission will promote the goal of zero pollution from nitrogen and phosphorus flows from fertilizers. So this is the aim of the target. It's a zero pollution. With a target for 2030 to reduce nutrient losses by at least 50%, while ensuring, of course, that there's no deterioration in soil fertility. And this will result in the reduction of use of fertilizers by at least 20%. This is, of course, a political target, but of course, in the preparation of the strategies, there have been a lot of discussion, a lot of exchange of knowledge base and assessment with the support of the knowledge and the scientific expert of the Joint Research Center and the European Environment Agency. And so its feasibility was checked. This target is also the target agreed at UN level with the Colombo Declaration. So the EU is not alone on that, and it will be monitored by 4 indicators: the number of monitoring stations with more than 50 ppm of nitrates under the Nitrates Directive, the gross nutrients balance, ammonia emissions coming from agriculture, so the air pollution, and soil carbon content in the soil. The biodiversity strategy and the farm to fork, they explain also how this target will be achieved. This will be achieved by a full implementation and enforcement of the relevant environmental and climate legislation. There will be a strengthened action, notably under the Nitrates Directive, but also in terms of actions in the river basin management plans under the Water Framework Directive, but also under the NEC Directive, so under air pollution and so on. Identifying with member states, so it's a work with the member state authorities, the nutrients load reductions needed to achieve these goals. This is already a work that has started in the context of the Water Framework Directive to see how to achieve a good status of all waters in the EU by 2027. Is only 7 years ahead. How much nutrient reduction loads are needed in each of the river basin. And of course, also there are other actions related to that at regional level, for instance, in the Baltic and so on, to reduce eutrophication of certain marine waters. And then, of course, on the side of the source, there is a work to apply properly balanced fertilization to avoid losses at source, and sustainable nutrient management. And then by managing nitrogen and phosphorus better throughout the life cycle, having therefore a circular approach. These targets and the reduction will result not only through these actions, but also to the combined application of the other targets, because the target of having at least 10% of agricultural area under landscape feature will, of course, help to achieve the reduction of nutrient losses and the reduction of the fertilizer use. If we have a quarter of the EU agricultural land, 25% under organic farming, this will also contribute to these reductions. On the side of the consumptions, the actions that the Commission will put in place to reduce food waste will also contribute to that, because there will be less need of production because there's a more efficient use and less food waste. There will be actions to also to move towards a more plant-based diet, which can also, in terms of consumptions, maybe have an impact on the production side. So we need to see these targets in a broader context of efforts to move towards a sustainability of this of the food production. So among these actions, on top of the strength and enforcement of existing EU legislation, the Commission will develop with the Member State also an integrated nutrients management action plan to address nutrient pollution at source and increase the sustainability of the livestock sector. This is what the strategy says. This is for by end 2022, so it's more than 2 years ahead of us. And this is due precisely because there is a need also in terms of economics to be much more efficient in the management of nutrients. I think Ludwig has explained very clearly what are the challenges, the link with the planetary boundaries, but also it's an economic cost. And Mark Sutton is there. He has been one of the leaders in working on the nutrients assessment. And there are the global environmental cost of all reactive nitrogen losses in Europe is estimated as some 70 to 320 billion per year, which is of course much above the cost of reducing pollution at source. So the work on the integrated nutrients management action plan will start in the second half of 21. And this is because it will build on the zero pollution action plan for air, water, and soil, which will also, of course, tackle nutrient pollution that is due in the first half of next year. And it will build also on the implementation report of the nitrates directive. It will be also published before June next year. It will look at the whole nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, including the sources of pollution, so agriculture for sure, but also industry, urban, waste, energy, transport. So it's really a holistic approach. And it will be, as I said, prepared with member state, identifying actions that need to be taken at the relevant levels, at EU level, but also at national, regional level. Often what matters in terms of eutrophication and pollution is really a local level. And in order to achieve the specific objectives that are set in the strategies, but also in the broader environmental acquis. So going towards the end of my intervention, I would like also to mention that this will build and will follow up also to the reflections that the Commission put forward 7 years ago in the Commission's consultative communication on phosphorus and all actions of the circular economy to have a better use of these limited resources. And the biodiversity strategy and the farm to fork strategy, they also indicate some of the initial goals of the nutrients management action plan. First of all is ensure a more sustainable application of nutrients. That's the goal of zero pollution. Addressing nutrients pollution at source, so tackling really the sources of this pollution. Increase the sustainability of the livestock sector, because of course the link with the excessive and the nutrient surplus in certain areas is linked, the certain hotspot is linked to an intensive concentration of livestock production in certain areas. And of course, stimulating the markets for recovered nutrients in line with the circular economy principles and actions of the Commission and the new framework that the fertilizer regulation has put in forward. So to conclude, I would like just to say that the Zero Pollution Action Plan, the Nitrates Directive report, will be published in the first half of next year and will be the first step. The second step will be in the second half of next year roadmap publication and a public consultation on the Integrated Nutrients Management Action Plan. And then by end of 2022, the intention of the Commission is to present this action plan based on all these. And of course, all the other element of the puzzle that Ludwig has mentioned, the fitness check of the Water Framework Directive, the revision of the Urban Wastewater Directive, the evaluation and revision of possibly of the Sewage Sludge Directive, and so on and so forth. Voila, I stop here, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for your excellent contribution. And now, before we start to answer questions and before we start to discuss, we invite Katja Klasitz from DG Research to present her view and her contribution of research to the circular economy and our farm to fork strategy. So I try to share the screen now. Just a second. So,
I cannot yet see anything. Oh yeah, there we go.
So, can you see your screen already, your presentation?
No, just hang on a second. I don't think I can see that here.
We can see the screen, Ludwig, but it's not presentation mode yet.
It's coming. You see it?
Yes, I can see it there. Yes. Okay. Hi. Hello, everyone. Is it? It's different now. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katja, as you already heard. I'm working in DTRTD, and I'm going to very quickly give you an overview of the R&I activities that we're planning in Horizon Europe in the coming years. Next slide, please. Okay, here you see an overview of Horizon Europe. The new framework program will run in 2021 to 2027. And you can see the structure with the 3 pillars. In pillar 2, we are divided into 6 clusters, and the cluster in which our research activities are going to take place is cluster 6 on food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment. Next slide, please. Cluster 6 has formulated several long-term impacts to which the nutrient activities are going to contribute, mostly to the one on the bottom right, sustainable and circular management and use of natural resources, as well as prevention and removal of pollution. Very much in line also to what Andrea just said, but of course also to food and nutrition security, to preservation, restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems, as well as climate neutrality and adaptation, and to a lesser degree, but still to governance models enabling sustainability, and also to sustainable rural, coastal, peri-urban and urban areas. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, our point of departure is the planetary boundaries concept to which most of you are probably familiar with. You are also aware that nitrogen and phosphorus are exceeding planetary boundaries already at this stage. And within Europe, the EEA came out with a report last year mentioning that nitrogen is overshooting the boundaries by a factor of 3.3, while phosphorus is exceeding it by a factor of 2. And obviously this has enormous risks for human health, for the environment, and for the economy as well. Next slide, please. All right, so we went forward, we developed an intervention logic and to see what we could, how we could contribute to future nutrient reduction goals. And we departed from the planetary boundaries to see what we could do on a regional level. So we identified knowledge gaps on nutrient and phosphorus thresholds of flows and regarding the concentration in air, water, and soil. We saw that we would need more data on modeling and assessment of NP emissions from sources which are not at this point included in the data we get from member states and which is included in official statistics. We saw that there's still work to be done for the stimulation of a market and of the uptake of technologies for the recovery of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers that are reclaimed from waste streams. There is work to be done in the assessment of health and environment impacts of these recovered fertilizers. And finally, we saw that we needed transition pathways to apply regional integrated holistic nutrient management solutions that are, as also Andrea already pointed out, local and regional in nature. Right, next slide, please. So we came up with some priorities on actions regarding nutrients, regarding nitrogen and phosphorus in Horizon Europe. We are for the moment working, preparing the first work program. So this is work in progress at the time being. We would like to develop a regional nitrogen and phosphorus targets approach within safe ecological boundaries. And that would include to come forward with an EU-wide mapping of nitrogen and phosphorus emissions at regional scales from all economic activities, from agriculture, from aquaculture, from industry, from transport, so everything that contributes to the environmental load at a regional level. Then we'd like to determine ecological boundaries, ecological limits of nitrogen and phosphorus at this regional level. That this could be a river basin level, to ensure the good ecological and environmental status of air, water, and soils. Also in this integrated way, we'd like to model pathways across sectors to reach these limits and support integrated demonstration actions. So to see it, to show everyone how it's done. Then we'd also like further down the line to assess environmental impacts and trade-offs of alternative fertilizing products to first stimulate the uptake of recovery options for nitrogen and phosphorus, and also to check out the best available techniques for fertilizing products from secondary raw materials. Thank you. Next slide. All right, and just to very quickly connect to what Andrea said before me, we're obviously also contributing to several deliverables of the European Green Deal with the nitrogen and phosphorus actions that we're planning, most of all to the zero pollution ambition, but also to the farm to fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy that have put forward those targets on the reduction of fertilizers and on the reduction of nutrient losses, as well as, of course, to the Circular Economy Action Plan. That's it already from me. I don't think you have another slide. Thank you, and I'll be happy to have your questions on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katja. And now I open the floor for a round of discussions. Thank you very much. So we have heard now, or we have seen the general frame, and we have seen the perspectives and a lot of actions from DG Envy and DG Research. And now you're welcome to raise your questions. I think I will pass on the floor to Andrea. Good morning, Andrea. And I think you manage the questions and you will invite a few interesting questions that we have at this point.
That's right, yes. And just to confuse things, we have two Andreas this morning. Morning, everybody. I'm Andrea Geiston from Thames Water in the UK. I'm going to be moderating the questions this morning. So to kick us off, and these are questions for the other Andrea. We have some questions around the targets that you articulated. So in particular, what the baseline is for the 20% target, and also whether that's calculated on a land area, so per hectare basis, or on an absolute value in terms of the number of tons of fertilizer applied.
So, well, as I said, there's no target on the minus 20% reduction. I think if you see the formulation, this is the expected consequence of the achievement of the other targets, notably the 50% pollution reduction from nutrients, but also the combined effect of the 25% of organic farming, the 10% landscape features, but also the reduction of food waste, and also the changes of diets. So it's the result of a number of specific other targets. Concerning the baseline, as I said, it will be on the 4 indicators I mentioned. We have still to define precisely, and there will be work next year precisely on the monitoring of the implementation of all the targets of the Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategy. But there are these 4 indicators, and the baseline is the last available data today on these 4 indicators. Concerning the question on if it applies only to mineral fertilizer or all fertilizers, well, I think the formulation is quite clear that it applies to all fertilizers. In fact, nutrients pollution and eutrophication is caused by both over-fertilization with mineral fertilizers, but also, especially in hotspot, the major problem is the use of organic fertilizers and manure. And therefore, this is where the reductions are. I would like also to say that already today, between 60 and 70% of the utilized agricultural area is designated as a nitrate vulnerable zone in Europe, which means that in that area already the threshold of 170 kilogram limit applies. And on top of that, there is an obligation by the nitrate directive to have balanced fertilization. Balanced fertilization, as you know, it means that to apply the fertilizers that the crops can absorb. And in principle, balanced fertilization means really minimizing the losses of fertilizers. And therefore, already, with the proper implementation and enforcement, and in some areas of very highly polluted, there are, of course, measures to have a reduction of fertilization even below the economic optimum. Precisely to ensure that the excess of nutrients that are present in the soil are absorbed by the crops in the kind of nutrients mining instead of polluting water sources. Voila. So I hope that I answered the questions, Andrea. But if there are others, I'm happy to.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Thank you, Andrea, for your explanation. And since we are running a little bit late, I invite our next speaker now, Fiona Marie. And I hope that you can see soon the presentation. Yes, I have it here. share my screen. So, Fian, do you see?
Yeah. Maybe
Yeah,
you can
okay.
show the presentation mode.
It is unfortunately my PowerPoint is so slow today. I don't know for which reason. Though if I do it, it takes always quite a while until it really changes the mode, and then it jumps back again, as you can see, and it jumps forth and back without me doing anything. But now we should come to the full screen. You see it?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, so please,
Okay.
the floor is yours, Vienna Marie.
Okay. In fact, it's Fin Amory, it's pronounced. So I'm a senior researcher at ILVO. And with my colleagues, we have watched the development of the farm-to-fork strategy with great interest, and we have we see some challenges and some needs, especially regarding phosphorus. Maybe it's important to know that in the history of Europe, we have a large phosphorus balances. And as a result, a lot of soils in Europe have high P contents. You can see it in the graph of Eurostat that the P balance is decreasing now, but it is still positive. So in general, there is still coming more phosphorus into our soils. Please, next. As you can see in the graph on the bottom, that this P positive P balance is not necessary if you're on the right-hand side of this figure, because the SOP, I don't know if you can see it, but it's in the x-axis. If you have a high SOP, you're on the top of the blue line, so your crop is not experiencing a P. It has enough P for their yields, but the SOP is too high for the environment. So if your SOP is higher than the target zone, you really do not need any positive P balance, also not balanced P fertilization like Andrea told. You really need P mining. Please, next slide. So it's really important to have nutrient management and stewardship. You need to know if you're in a build-up or a mining scenario, and you also need to know the P that is in the soil, to know if you're in the target zone or the pink zone in the figure, if you're below or up. And we think that the farm-to-fork strategy, no, it's still yeah, thank you. In the farm-to-fork strategy, there should really be a focus on the high P soils, so the soils on the right-hand side of the pink target soil. For these soils, you need a more strict legislation. And we have seen in recent reports that there are still a lot of member states in Europe that do not have any phosphorus standards for their soils. And some member states that do have standards, but it does not matter what P is in the soil. And we think it's really important to look at the soil P and to really target the high P soils. And for these soils, it's also important to have specific mitigation measures, so not only strict legislation. Please, next slide.
Right. My slides are stuck, sorry.
Maybe I can already say that the 20% reduce in the fertilizer use, you can even have much more for the high P soils. You can in fact have 100%, especially for the inorganic fertilizers. Yeah, you can see it here in the graph of Eurostat. There are a lot of member states that have a significant part of the green bar. So the green bar is the inorganic fertilizer use, and for the high P soils, it's really in fact easy to not use any more inorganic P fertilizer. But there you need fertilizers where there is no P present. I have field trials, and then I asked the farmers to not put any inorganic pea fertilizer on the part where my trial is. And then a lot of farmers say they do not have access to these fertilizers with nitrogen in it, with potassium in it, but the phosphorus comes along. So there's also a need for transition to the fertilizers without any phosphorus. Please, next slide. So then the other targets of the reduction of nutrient losses by 50% in 2030, I think it will be really hard to get this for the phosphorus, because for phosphorus, the P losses are largely determined by the P that is present in the soil. You see it in the green graph in the figure. To give an example, in Flanders, the target zone for P, it's between 120 and 180. So if you're above the 180, the P losses towards the environment are expected to be too high. Please, next. But the average soil in Flanders has a P content of 300. So there are almost no soils in the target zone in Flanders. And for this average soil, it takes a lot of time to decrease towards this 180 upper boundary of the target zone. If you stop using P totally, it still takes like 2 decades depending on the crop you use. And if you still allow some P inputs, but way below the P export by the crop, you need 3, 4, or even more years to get towards acceptable P losses. Please, next slide. So to conclude, we need a lot of time, so much more time than the 10 years that is set now for phosphorus to decrease in the soils and to also decrease in our losses. And these targets will have a lot of consequences, because we need to mine for P, because this means that we have to give less P to our soils, and this means, in fact, that we have to reduce the P input by manure. And this has, of course, consequences for our livestock future. And it will also have consequences for the carbon input into the soil, because the carbon and the phosphorus are interconnected, especially in compost, in manure, and so on. But the farm to fork strategy says that we have to do this reduction while ensuring no deterioration in soil fertility. And this means that we really have to focus for the C input on carbon sources with a high carbon over phosphorus ratio, like management residues or woody compost are examples of this. But of course, we can also have reduction of nutrient losses, not only by reducing the P in the soil, but also by specific measures on mobilization, delivery, and impacts, for instance, on erosion control to limit those phosphorus losses. Okay, this was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this good and interesting presentation. And now, before we start a new round of discussions, I give the floor to Wim de Vries. Wim, I will prepare the presentation for you. Wim is representing Wageningen Research, and we will hear his comments in, I hope, very soon. Yes, here we are. So you see already the presentation, Wim?
Yeah, but you have to go to the top, Ludwig, to get it started.
Yeah, okay.
You know, the end. Yeah.
So when it will come soon. I'm really sorry. I really have some technical bug here, as you can probably see. It takes always quite a while to change the presentations.
Es könnte sein, dass du erst auf Bearbeiten aktivieren gehen musst, genau. Also.
Now you're at the end, yeah.
We are. Wim, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ludwig. Well, you're at the end now with the questions, but let me start to say that my presentation will be, is the farm to fork ambition sufficient to keep the nutrients within environmental limits? Actually, there it is. Next slide, please. Well, you've heard the ambition of the farm to fork, a reduction of nutrient losses by at least 50%, and use of fertilizers, they think, related 20%, while ensuring no degradation in soil fertility, which has to do also with carbon and phosphorus, the previous speaker. Now, I thought myself, what is the basis behind that 50%? I think I know now. It's, I think, the ambition that has already been mentioned several times, also advocated by Professor Mark Sutton, who is among the panelists. Let's try to halve the nitrogen waste, which is the sum of all losses to air and water, came in the Colombo Declaration. But since my name was mentioned also in relation to EAT, well, the EAT-Lancet Commission came up with the latest planetary boundaries, which are for sure not so low as mentioned before, like 3.3 times exceeded. It's not that bad. Actually, the planetary nitrogen boundary started with the Rockström paper, where nitrogen was a pure gas, nothing else. It's one sentence. The current input is something like 120 teragram or 140, they said, and we think 2035 would be enough. But let's do that in more detail. So then I was challenged and worked on a boundary for the global scale, which then came into the Stefan paper in 2015, which has been shown. And I tried to update that for the EAT-Lancet paper. And there is then for nitrogen a high ambition and a lower ambition. But you would say, what means high and low ambition? That has to do with the critical concentrations that you accept in surface waters. And there's, of course, a range in that. And then you see this is an input boundary. It's not a loss boundary, it's an input boundary. And then for nitrogen, it seems on the global scale, something like 20%. And for phosphorus, it was based on this whole idea given before, that you have on the long term, you can go to equilibrium input of phosphorus. So phosphorus input is equal to uptake if the soil is at a sufficient level. That's the long-term ambition. And the short term is that when soils are still deficient in phosphorus, you can increase it, whereas the oversaturated soils should be mined. But there are large areas on the globe, like in Africa, where you have P-deficient soils, and that comes then to the short-term ambition. Now, I like now, next slide, please, to focus on nitrogen. That's a completely different nutrient compared to phosphorus. Phosphorus is chemically absorbed in the soil, but nitrogen is completely different. If you, for example, lower the phosphorus input, indeed, in a high P soil, you can do without any problems for the crop growth. But that's not so easy for nitrogen. Now, on the left-hand side, you see this famous Stefan paper. I was there responsible, actually, for the nitrogen boundary. But there is a big but. There was huge comments on this whole planetary boundary for nitrogen. People disagreeing strongly and saying there is no nitrogen planetary boundary. It's a local thing. It is an issue of locally being too high, or possibly the nitrogen input can even be too low. Think about Africa. There you have no real environmental problems in several places, while the nitrogen input is too low for adequate crop growth. So what you should do in principle is doing a spatially explicit effect, let's say, assessment. And that's what we try to do, funded by the European Environmental Agency and also with Fertilizers Europe. And here you see an example of the nitrogen surplus all over Europe. 40,000 combinations we calculated with a model. And you see, of course, the Netherlands, Brittany, Po region, high inputs. And similarly, there are spatially variable nitrogen boundaries. So the inputs and the surpluses vary. The same holds for the critical values. Next slide, please. How did we then do those critical values? And now the system is a bit waiting.
Yeah, that's it.
Let me start to talk about it at least. We said, okay, you have impacts on terrestrial biodiversity. The Bird and Habitat Directive is there. That has to do with ammonia emissions. There is the problem with nitrate in drinking water, and the Nitrate Directive. And there is, of course, the nitrogen in surface water with eutrophication related to the Water Framework Directive. And now I hope really that the next slide is coming.
Yeah.
Because based on those impacts, you can define critical limits, values, like critical deposition level. You have to go to this one. Yeah, this one. Exactly. Where your point. Yeah, thank you.
You see, okay.
Yeah, that's it. So from nitrogen impacts like biodiversity loss, eutrophication, pollution of drinking water, the first step we did is define critical limits, like deposition rates on terrestrial ecosystem, critical concentrations in the runoff to surface waters, and nitrate concentrations in groundwater for drinking water. Based on that, with a model, we back calculated critical losses. What is then the related emission of ammonia, the related runoff that is critical, and leaching? And the next step is then, what are the related critical inputs for ammonia emissions, for surface water eutrophication, for groundwater effects? Lots of course, assumptions and model assessments here, but the next slide then shows, hopefully it now works, yes, the spatial variability in the things. Now let's go, I only showed two things. Here you see the actual inputs of nitrogen, expressed here in kilograms per hectare per year, well above 300 in places like the Netherlands, but there are areas where it is even 50 to 100. And here you see the variation in the critical inputs. Here it goes from green to red. You can imagine it, the higher the input, the more the risk. Here we do it the other way around. The lower, the higher the risk, because this means in these regions you have very sensitive ecosystems. If you look to the critical loads for biodiversity, there are very sensitive ecosystems in the Mediterranean region. But if you then look to the exceedance of the two, of course you see again areas like in the Netherlands and Brittany and Po region coming out, and also in Ireland. But there are also regions where apparently you do not have a big problem, where the current inputs do not exceed critical deposition levels on ecosystems, which we know is the case. If you now look at the European scale, on average, the difference is 31%. Do we look then the same thing for surface waters? Then you see that it's more critical. It's on average not 100, but 83, and the difference is 43%. This is on the inputs. The next slide, please. Here I summarized it. And what you see here is again the same 145. This is the input by fertilizer and biological end fixation. This is the input by manure and biosolids. And this is deposition and some mineralization from peat soils, drained peat soils. Here at critical ammonia emissions, going down 31, critical runoff. And if you take leaching to groundwater, on the whole European scale, it can be even go up. But beware, this is an average. Still at 20%, I think, of the soils, it's exceeded. But there are regions when you would purely look at 50 milligram nitrate per liter, then there is a possibility to increase the N input only for that criterion, of course. Then you violate the others. Now, how is it then related to the losses? That's not the same number. Here, look at, this is a different scale. 53 kilogram per hectare per year we estimate as losses. Losses to air, that is mainly ammonia. Losses to water, and this part is what I would call denitrification. That includes also a little bit N2O, NOx and N2. And here you have then 35%, and believe it or not, 50% is needed on average to get critical runoff, the runoff at critical levels. And for groundwater also, you need a decrease. It's not the same. One thing I like to mention now, which is not on this graph, but which we have in our publication, the remaining between this input and this number is, of course, the crop uptake. And when you go down, and we calculate it at the same efficiency, then also your crop yield is going down. If you remove nitrogen inputs and you have the same nutrient use efficiency, the next slide, please, the crop uptake goes down. My conclusions are this. If you look at the ambition to reduce losses by 50%, that seems quite in line with the needed runoff reduction in view of surface water quality. But less seems needed if you want to protect terrestrial biodiversity, that becomes 35%, but it needs to be, of course, spatially different, higher in hotspots, and it can be much lower, or in principle, for the environment, no reduction needed in extensive regions. Although I do now not mention N2O. For N2O, of course, it's good that you reduce. And the last point, I didn't have time to present that here, that is about how can you do this? We calculated how much can you increase the nitrogen use efficiency to avoid that your crop growth is going down because you reduce the input. But you cannot do that up to infinite levels. Something like 80% or 85 or 90 is the maximum you can get for nitrogen. And are there then still regions there where you have to reduce your livestock production or crop yields if you want to protect the environment? We have maps made for that. And you can imagine that this is, for example, the case in the Netherlands. Even if you increase the nitrogen use efficiency strongly, then still, if you want to protect it, that has an expense at the production level. And that's exactly what the discussion in the Netherlands is about the nitrogen crisis. So much more, it will be coming in a publication soon, but I hope there are questions on what I told you. That is my last slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, a short round of 1 or 2 questions. So please, Andrea, take over again. And
of course, I'm going to actually invite a couple of my colleagues on the panel to ask their questions because I hadn't spotted their raised hands earlier. So Penelope, I believe you maybe had a comment on the earlier presentations.
Hello, yes, Penelope Vincent-Sweet from the European Environment Bureau. Yes, I did have quite a few comments. We are very worried about no discrimination between mineral fertilizers which are mined and organic fertilizers which are recycled. It seems that we need to change our look and look at resources use. And also we find very difficult to understand how we're going to achieve a 50% reduction in losses by reducing by only 20% fertilizers. So I understood that actually the 20% is going to be an effect of the rest. So perhaps we shouldn't concentrate on that too much. But nobody has dared to say that it's very important to stop mining stuff to put on our fields. And then we're talking about doing this without reducing soil fertility. Soil fertility is related to the soil life, the organic matter, the organic carbon in the soil. We seem to be looking at soil like when I was at university. Soil was just a neutral matrix which you poured fertilizers into, and the plants took out the fertilizers. This is, I'm afraid, last century. In the 21st century, soil is a living organism, and so I think we need to paradigm shift. We need to, and for the we're looking at vulnerable areas. It's more than 20 years, well more than 20 years that the Nitrates Directive came out. I was living in Brittany then, which is an vulnerable area. And each year there were lots of actions and nothing happened, there was no improvement. So how is actually something going to happen? I was very interested by Anne-Marie Fien's presentation for phosphorus. How are we going to reduce the use of phosphorus? Can we do a bit more than just talking about it? Can we not, I mean, the research subjects are very interesting. There are knowledge gaps, but we have sufficient knowledge to take action already without waiting for the results of the research. And how do you plan to achieve 25% organic farming by 2030? Sorry, that's a lot of different questions.
Excellent. Well, what I might do is just perhaps also group those questions for along with some of the others we've had through on the chat. So there are lots of questions in terms of soil P levels and in terms of the mining approach that were outlined in Fien's presentation. So I wonder whether perhaps you could just come in on that and perhaps comment on the targets that have been set. So whether mining will actually allow us to exclusively meet those targets and whether that might have any impact on crop yields. Also, there was a specific question around your comment that aluminium phosphates perhaps required more attention than other types of phosphate in the soil, such as organic and iron-bound phosphates. So can I hand over to you for those questions?
Okay, yeah. For the P mining, I agree that's really important for the high P soils to mine P, but the target zone setting is really important. It's important that we know the values of what is acceptable for the environment and what is high enough, what soil P is high enough for the crops. So only in that case, if we have defined these numbers right, you can also define the soil as a high P soil. And if you then have a high P soil, so above the target P zone, you can be really sure that the crop will do not have any effects on the P mining. And in most cases, this is in 10 years of no P use will have no effect at all on the yields. And I saw there was a question on how we can convince farmers to do this. And I have seen that if I had trials on phosphorus use and I had some treatments without phosphorus, and then the farmer could really see, yeah, there is no effect in yields. There are no differences. You can see in the crop. It's really important, I think, to have these demo trials to convince the farmers. There was also a question on the erosion control. That's also right. That's why I also mentioned the importance of specific measures on the erosion control. Maybe I'm a bit focused too much on my country. It's a really flat country, but it's not only erosion. Also, these soils can have P leaching, and there it's important to mine the P, because that's the only way to get P out of the soil, to get the P losses down.
May I add maybe here the point that the question was, why are his current knowledge not put into action? Maybe also on P. I think this whole presentation that Anne-Marie gave is exactly the policy in the Netherlands, exactly. So when you're on a certain level, you're not allowed to give more than the crop takes up. When it's lower than that level, you can add a little bit, and the other way around. And currently, that's now into becoming in, let's say, the policy in China. I have 8 PhDs over there. That would mean in China a reduction of 70% of the phosphorus use, and that's serious business. That's 15% of the global P consumption. So yes, on P, we know these kind of things. The big problem, I think, is exactly what Anne-Marie said. It means for example, in the Netherlands, that they try to get the P out of the manure, make a fertilizer out of it, and get manures with high C and CP ratios. The bigger problem is nitrogen. Nitrogen is not mined. That's not the issue. I mean, we can take it from the air, but we cannot come to zero losses of nitrogen. There's always inevitable ammonia emissions, N2O emissions, etc. And for nitrogen, if you reduce the inputs, you get directly impacts on the crop yield. Farmers know that because it's a completely different behavior in the soil. It's not chemically absorbed and released. It's biological mechanisms. So there we have to improve the nitrogen use efficiency. And that's many ideas that do it as precision fertilization, do it at the right time, at the right at the right place, with the right type, with balanced fertilization. And here's lots and lots to be gained. But still we have to be aware that we cannot bring the nitrogen use efficiency to 100% like in P. And there is an expert panel that says if you come to 80 to 90%, there is inevitable losses, so you will mine the soil with nitrogen. And that we have to be aware, meaning that there are regions where environmental protection comes at the expense of production. If you really want to do that, then the production has to go down. That's not terribly difficult if you increase it at places where there is the option to do that. So it is this whole, let's say, balance between production and environmental protection that's for nitrogen an extremely urgent and issue to tackle.
Maybe I have.
Thank you, Wim.
Maybe I have to ask, as I see in the chat, there's a lot of confusion for the P mining. I have to apologize, but P mining, I use it also for the P, getting out P of the soil. Yeah. It's used a lot in literature as well. But P mining is maybe more correct to use it for getting out of the mines and to use it as an inorganic P fertilizer. But in fact, in Flanders, we have so much P in our soils that are almost mines there.
Yeah, we use the same word in the Netherlands. We're mining the soils. Yeah.
Okay.
Super. Okay.
One more question, and then we have to continue with our presentation. So please take one more question, Andrea.
Okay, I'll invite Jessica to come in, who's been waiting patiently.
Thank you very much, Jessica Stubenbrau from University of Rostock. My question was to Andrea from the first round, and I wanted to ask, as we have seen that nutrient hotspots and intensive livestock farming are going hand in hand, and also the last two speakers, they really challenged the future of livestock farming. So what I missed also in this farm to fork strategy are really clear targets to minimize livestock farming, and I would like to know whether this can be foreseen in the future to come to really tackle this problem. And I also think it's not only with fostering more plant-based diet in Europe is the first step, but it's also about overcoming the export policies that are connected with this, and to really try to reconnect the amount of animals we have with the farmland that is available here. So I wonder whether we at one point will really also from the European Commission tackle this problem and try to at least formulate some really clear targets to not only be more efficient, but to also really minimize production in Europe of livestock. Yeah, this is my question.
Thank you.
Well, I think that since the end of the quotas under the Common Agricultural Policies, now it's up to member states to decide their policy framework on livestock farming and so on. And it's not for the Commission to set these targets. But by setting targets on the planetary boundaries that were clearly described now, and see what are the nutrients losses that needs to be reduced, you come to the appropriate policy conclusions that need to be taken at national and regional level, or really on what are the concrete measures. And we saw some countries who started to introduce measures to reduce the number of animals, reduce the intensification in certain areas. And therefore, this is really something that is not for the EU, precisely because there are different situations in different countries. So it's really for the national level, and also there is different. It's an issue of subsidiarity. So certainly. But the holistic approach that the Commission is taking with the Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategies is precisely to put very clear on the table what are the planetary boundaries, what are the pollution reduction needs to be taken on the ground, but then the solutions need to be taken locally. And then we heard also that the soil is different, the water situation is different, the type of agriculture practices is different, the climatic conditions are different, and therefore the solutions needs to be taken at the most appropriate level, certainly a national level where there can be measures taken, and they could be, legally binding measures. They could be incentives. They could be. There are a lot of different policy tools that can be used for that.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's go to the next presentations and share the screens. I hope I get now. I don't get the right one. Just a second. Yeah. Do you see the screen now?
I do see it. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Tiffany from Fertilizers Europe here speaking. While you put it in a presentation mode, I can already start by thanking everyone for the opportunity of being part of the panelists this morning. And that is, in a way, speaking to the true heart of the activities we do as Fertilizers Europe, since it's been a couple of years now that we see and work on improving nutrient sustainability, being in the context of the European Nitrogen Expert Panel that Wim presented and mentioned, and in the context of this work, as well as the recent Colombo Declaration that we also, as an industry, supported. So for us, it's ultimately not whether mineral fertilizers are worse or better towards losses to the environment than organic fertilizers or manures. Here, maybe science will give us the last word at some point. From my knowledge about what science delivers, and taking into consideration a recent paper presented by Hibek, a colleague from Wim in Wageningen, it shows that balanced plant nutrition is actually the best way in terms of maintaining carbon in the soil. And I guess science will demonstrate that it is most probably the same approach for other environmental constraints. If we go to the next slide, I would like to underline that we as Fertilizers Europe accept the challenge of the Farm to Fork strategy to reduce nutrient losses by 50%. Where we have concerns is in considering the given time frame. By 2030, especially, that is like the day after tomorrow. Also considering that one of the adequate way to implement efforts to reach that target will be in the context of the CAP, and that the new Common Agriculture Policy will not take, it will not be implemented before 2022 or later. That is then leaving not so much time to really be able to get to that ambitious goal by 2030. And it ultimately for us requires a partnership throughout the value chain. So we are willing to work hand in hand with farmers to provide tools for what we can control in terms of losses to the environment from the use of mineral fertilizers, and also to cooperate with the other players in the plant nutrition industry to make sure that we can best be responsible for the losses we can manage and control. I think ultimately Wim pointed it very correctly that agriculture is an open system, so we will never be able to get emissions to zero. As far as the consequence of the 50% reduction target for nutrient losses is concerned, and its consequence for fertilizer use, minus 20% concerns both organic and mineral fertilizers. I cannot speak for organic or manures use. In terms of mineral fertilizers, what we see is that there is a decreasing trend in the last years, and being the Green Deal or the Farm to Fork strategy, those are additional developments that will definitely, I guess, and we suppose will enhance this decreasing trend in the near future. In terms of where to, and I will come to my next slide indeed, Ludwig, in terms of how to reach that target, how to work on that approach, how to get it done basically. We believe that one of the most constructive approach is to increase nutrient use efficiency, as it was pointed by Wim. We consider that the Common Agriculture Policy is a centerpiece to actually set up nutrient management plans at national or regional level. There will be different ways and new tools with the future CAP that can help to target better the use of fertilizers and mineral fertilizers, especially being eco schemes, the farm sustainability tool for nutrients. There is a bigger role also for farm advisory services to play. In terms of the metrics, we believe that beyond the metrics that were mentioned by Andrea Vettori, such as the gross nitrogen balance, it would be also worth to consider how by developing a farm sustainability data network, there would also be sufficient available data to derive nitrogen use efficiency indicators. And as far as what we can do as an industry, it is really for us key to continue to promote and encourage farmers to use precision fertilization techniques and advanced fertilizing products. But ultimately, and this is maybe making a link with the presentation of Wim before, there is no one size fits all. And the question we have, and that is maybe pushing the ball back to Andrea Vettori and the decision makers, is how will that 50% reduction for nutrient losses be implemented? Is it at national level? Is it at regional level? Because we clearly see that there are very different situations from one country to another. We heard from Fien that the pollution from pea is a concern, especially from a Flemish perspective. But we also know from our Austrian colleagues that there are soils who are massively deficient of phosphorus. So the situation is extremely different, and here we would be really key to understand how that overall target could be then developed in the context maybe of the integrated nutrient management action plan that the Commission aims to publish in 2022. So coming to my last slide, basically, we believe that we have to recognize in the context of the implementation of the Farm to Fork strategy, the national and the regional differences between one country and within different EU countries. There are massive differences. This is linked to the concentration of livestock or not. This is linked to the way to the different crops that are farmed and so on and so forth. So we really strongly encourage to have a more targeted approach in terms of how to meet that target. In addition, we also want to continue to encourage the use of digital farming, variable rate application, advanced fertilizers such as inhibitors, and also targeted balance for plant nutrition by considering all the sources and all the nutrients as key elements for farmers to consider. And here the farm sustainability tool is really one way for us collectively to improve that. And finally, we strongly encourage to really reap the benefits of tools that already exist, such as the nitrogen use efficiency indicators. And maybe it's also about preparing the way and the field for innovation. But our mineral fertilizer industry is sometimes seen as an old industry being resistant to change and innovation, but even us, we recognize the challenge of climate neutrality and are willing to take step in order to further develop, for instance, the use of green ammonia as a feedstock for the mineral fertilizer production. So step by step, we really want to, wherever we can improve our environmental impact, we want to go towards that direction, being in the presentation side, in the production side, sorry, as in the use phase of fertilizers. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Tiffany. We have heard now the position of the mineral fertilizer industry, and I go to the next step, which is the organic fertilizer industry, and I ask Bernard Blanc to give his view and his presentation. do you see the slide already or not yet?
Not yet. Good morning, everybody. So I will start. I present myself. So I'm Benoît Planck. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer of Italpollina. So there is no slide.
Yeah, just a second.
Yes. So Italpollina, it's Italian SMEs, but now we are a global company because in 50 years we processed manure in the north of Italy and we export in more than 80 different countries in the world. So we are also a producer of biostimulants. So my presentation will focus on the view of the industry of organic fertilizer, but also on biostimulant producer and how this industry can achieve the goal of the farm-to-fork strategy and propose some solution. So.
You still cannot see the slides, sorry
No.
for that. Chris, could you take over the slide share, or because I'm stuck here, my computer is stuck. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Chris, can you take over the slide share?
Or I can share my screen if you prefer.
Yeah, or please share your screen, yes.
Yes, okay. So I will do that. I will put on mode. And I will, okay. There we go. Where can I cannot. Where is my screen? Here. Okay. Partager.
That works fine, Benoit.
You're on mute, Benoit.
We can see, but not hear.
Okay, so now it's good, I think.
Now we have both.
Perfect, thanks. So as I said, we are producer of organic-based fertilizer and biostimulant. We are a member and founding member of EBIC and ECOFI, so the two European associations representing biostimulant and organic-based fertilizer. And I will give you an update on the position of this association regarding the farm-to-fork strategy. I just want to say some word on Italpollina because Tiffany said some minutes ago that mineral industry could be seen as an old industry, but organic sectors is also in old industry because some of the industry of producer of organic fertilizer made fertilizer since decades and centuries. So we are on. Can go on the next slide. Yes. So, as I said, the circular economy is the nature of the organic-based fertilizer because we are and we valorize byproduct coming the agriculture sector or the agri-food sectors, and like presented on this slide, by using crops, so we produce food and feed fiber. Then this feed could go to the to produce manures, and we have secondary raw materials that we valorize this raw material as organic based fertilizer and go back to the soil to put nutrient on the plant and also provide carbons. So for us, the circular economy is on the genius of the industry, and in the specific case of Italpollina, just to highlight, for example, the one of your plant produce chicken manure, processed chicken manure in the north of Italy. And last year, we created a second loop with a partnership with Innova Feed, the first world producer of insects. So we will valorize now the frass of insect as a new type of fertilizing products. By this way, we will reduce the loss of nutrient, but also we will reduce the quantity of waste produced by the food agri sectors. Just to give some information, but I know that we are very aware about that, but that is some publication made some years ago in France, but we probably have the same presentation in different countries. 10 units of NPK from organic sources give the same extra yield than 15 units of NPK from inorganic sources. In fact, it's not due to only the content of NPK, but when we use organic sources, we have a lot of other elements that improve the yield because we produce by providing carbon in the soil humus. We also stimulate the biological activity by azotobacter, for example. Some bacteria fix off nitrogen, but we have also the possibility to have some other biostimulant from microorganic sources. We have also, and due to the fact that the nutrients are complex with organic carbon, we reduce the risk of leaching and so on. So by this way, we can see that we can reduce the consumption of nutrients at European level by using organic sources and also by adding some biostimulant to improve the quality of the soil, reduce the impact of the quality of the environment, but also improve the quality of the air. So if I sum up and how the organic-based fertilizer can fit the farm-to-fork strategy, I will present just 3 main topics. So the first one is that the better nutrient use efficiency will help to reduce fertilizer and pesticide input because, as I said, organic-based fertilizer is not only provider of NPK, but also there is carbon, there is a lot of biological activities. We have also an important action because we will store carbon in the soil and it will improve the soil health and the climate resilience. And the last thing is that due to the fact that we are on the circular nature, we reduce the quantity of food waste, and by this way we will valorize some secondary raw material as input. For the plant biostimulant sectors and how we can contribute to more sustainable food production and processing. So it's a new category, plant biostimulant at European level, and we are very happy to have this new framework. So the first one is that we will improve the tolerance to abiotic stress, and we will reinforce plant vigor. So in this case, we will help a plant to resist to climate change, for example, the heat or the drought and something like that. We will also improve the nutrient uptake and efficiency. So we will avoid the leaching of nutrients, but we will also, by using, for example, mycorrhizae, use the phosphorus block in the soil. We will also have an action on water use efficiency. We will protect the soil health and the biodiversity by adding beneficial microorganisms or by stimulating biomass activities. We also, when we use plant biostimulant, improve the root development, and we will stimulate the underground biomass, but also the soil carbon content to protect the soil erosion. And at the end, the last thing, but also important, is that we will improve by using biostimulants the technical quality of the crops. So by this way, we will reduce the waste in the food sectors because we can improve the shelf life of the apple or something like that. So we can act as industry on the farm-to-fork strategy by using organic-based fertilizer and plant biostimulant. But for that, we need a strong commitment and support from the different stakeholders. So I try to sum up the 6 main topics that we need and support is we need a coherence on the policy between the EU level and the national frameworks. We need a single market, and we would like to avoid the misinterpretation at different level of the regulation. We also would like to have an advice incentive in CAP for farmers to integrate plant nutrient management. I'm very happy to hear that Horizon Europe could fund some R&D project, but also it's also important because we speak about the reduction of fertilizer, but today a large part of the fertilizing products are not covered by European statistics. So it's very important for us to have European statistics. And by this way, we can demonstrate that we achieve the goals. And like last point is we need opportunities and avenue for positive innovation. So we could together develop a lot of new solutions, and we must be able to manage this new innovation to reach these goals. So thanks a lot for this attention and give me the opportunity to present a view of the industry of biostimulant and organic-based fertilizer.
Okay, thank you very much, Benoit. Now we come to the next 2 presentations. Frédéric Martin from Prayon, and I have to ask you, Frédéric, to share your own screen because I'm still stuck here technically. So please share your screen and go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with Zoom, but I will try. Yeah. So do you see my presentation? No? Okay.
I cannot see it. Can anybody see it? Because my screen is so I
was there for a little while now. Now
here we go. Here we go. I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know how to make it bigger. Does everybody see? I guess, yeah.
We see, Frédéric, if you want to click on the screen button on the bottom right that you had, that would be, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I did, but for whatever reason, it doesn't switch. I try again.
We'll carry on. We can see the slides.
Yeah, okay,
voilà.
Perfect.
C'est bon.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting us for this presentation. I think, as Andrea mentioned, this is a really cross-cutting subject. And I'd like to bring here a little bit the view of the PAPA. And so maybe it's a little bit a strange name. So first, what is PAPA? PAPA is the Phosphoric Acid and Phosphate Association, which is a sector group of the European Chemical Industry Council from the CEFIC. And so we're basically representing, and I'm talking here as a representative of the European manufacturer of purified phosphoric acid and also food phosphate salts. Also, it's food phosphates. So food phosphate as such, they're used in their very wide applications in dairy, meat processing and baking. And they have been reevaluated very recently by EFSA. So it's really a food additive that is quite commonly used. And also we speak about food phosphate. We speak basically about purified phosphoric acid, purified salt. And these have also a very wide technical application, meaning technical industry. They're used in the paint industry, they're used in metal treatment, flame retardant. They have many different applications also requiring a certain purification level. I don't have figures about volume or whatever, but if I refer, what could be of interest, if I refer to studies done 10 years ago, this represents probably probably 5% of the total P, phosphorus, that is processed worldwide. So we have a fairly little contribution. We cannot, I think, we can achieve far less than fertilizer or whatever. Well, quite clearly, phosphate are produced from ore and mining. It's non-available, non-infinite available raw material. So we have been always looking for cautious utilization and potential recycling routes. And in this frame, yeah, well, we can only welcome. I think it's really nice to have this element that will promote recycling, the Farm to Fork Green Deal, and also that P has been identified as critical raw material. Yeah. It's not, I will not make it too long, and there are actually two more slides. And in one hand, we will express a little bit what we can support as the industry, but also what are the hurdles that we have. And in the frame of what can be supported is that the industry represented by PAPA has a fairly broad knowledge of phosphate chemistry. They have a very long history of extraction method, of purification process, and they have a long experience also in shaping, I would say, in making the phosphate salt very functional for a specific application. Talking about extraction method, in chemistry books, you still have reference to some methods that are known, like you can have Solvay. Some of our members have their name and named technology. And so many plants in the world, many pea processing plants in the world are working according to our technology. So on one hand, this is something we can really help in. Another aspect is that we have close contact with a very large number of downstream users. All these applications, technical applications and food application, obviously we have a good downstream contact. When we talk about recycling somehow, how can we reinvest, recover P in our system? One of the main hurdles we have today is that the current legal framework is quite restrictive. For example, a good source of P that we could utilize is sewage sludge, but in today's keys application that we have, it's legally not allowed. So there are some we need some move in the legal framework to be able to incorporate potentially recycle, P recycling. Another aspect that has not to be underestimated, it's a little bit the image, the perception, would be downstream users willing to use, or downstream users willing to use phosphate coming, for example, from manure. And I have a good example of this. Maybe Andrea from Thames River knows more about it, but I remember a couple of years ago that Coca-Cola wanted to enter the mineral bottled water market. And they had a very good plan to use surface water and to purify the water and then re-enrich or remineralize the water on a target manner. And theoretically, this looks like a great idea. You know, technologically, it was quite brilliant. So I think they started the project, but at a point of time, everything collapsed when it came to be known that the water they were planning to use was coming from the Thames River. And I think from there, I think they built the plant, but it went completely bankrupt. So even if technologically it's an interesting idea, we need to make sure that, yeah, the image needs to be worked out. And also, in any case, for our industry, there is only there is no separate routes. Everything is kind of mixed. You start from purified phosphoric acid in dedicated tank, and this is used further to produce salts. And so if we want to keep different routes, different routes, we need significant investment to produce dedicated equipment, storage tanks, etc. So yeah, this is in a nutshell a little bit what we can say. As I said, we have some technology, I think, but for direct use, there is still some way to go. And that's a little bit, yeah, what we can say today. Thank you for your attention.
Can't hear you, Chris.
Ludwig, you're on mute.
Trying to talk. Sarah, can we see your slides?
I can see my slides on your screen or somebody's screen.
Okay, right, that's what should be happening. Do you want to start?
Yes.
So here we are. Now you can hear me, no? So
Yes.
sorry for these technical issues. Now I invite Sarah Gilman. I can overtake to show you a presentation again. It should work now. No, I cannot because somebody else is.
I'm showing the presentation.
You are showing the presentation. Okay. So please, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the ESPP for inviting
Can you talk a bit louder?
Oh, yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the ESPP for the invitation for Eureau to speak this morning. I hope you can all hear me now and see the slides.
Yes.
Yeah? Good. So next slide, please. Thank you. Well, first of all, I would just like to briefly explain who Eureau is. For those of you who don't know Eureau, we're the Federation of Water and Wastewater Services and Service Providers in Eureau. We have 34 national organisations who are members representing drinking water and wastewater, and we represent both the public and the private sector. And today I'm very much speaking about the wastewater side, and because that's very, very closely tied with nutrients. So next slide, please. So where are we now with nutrients and wastewater? And I wanted to say thank you to the previous speaker for setting up my talk so perfectly. There are a number of things to cover here today, but nutrient management is central to wastewater treatment. It's what wastewater operators do every day. Fundamentally, wastewater treatment is about controlling the carbon, but also the nitrogen and the phosphorus in wastewater. Standards for nitrogen and phosphorus in wastewater are set at the European level by the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. And all across Europe, wastewater treatment plants achieve those standards. So I really want to make the message today that we are already removing a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus, a lot of the load from the wastewater before it returns to the water environment. Our members also work to enhance standards for nitrogen and phosphorus under the Water Framework Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And I think this reinforces the point made earlier on this morning by Andrea, where obviously there are big concerns about eutrophication in the waters and the condition, for example, of the Baltic Sea and other waters across Europe. So if we look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, nitrogen and phosphorus in wastewater goes to effluent emissions. So emissions to the water environment, as I've said, are controlled by the big directives, Urban Wastewater, Water Framework Directive and Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Emissions to land are usually controlled by domestic legislation, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. Emissions to air are not directly controlled at the wastewater treatment plant. Controls on incineration do exist, but not of the wastewater treatment process itself. If we look at the circle on the bottom right-hand side, this is to explain that already, if you like, recovered and reuse of nutrients is happening from the wastewater sector. We produce across Europe, according to Eureau members, about 9.2 million tonnes of dry solids a year. That's sludge. And it has different outlets. Nearly half goes to agriculture. Some is about a quarter is incinerated. Some is returned to land reclamation or to recultivate land. And then there is a small amount to other uses and landfill. So I would like to stress the point at this moment that already across Europe, these are averages for Eureau members, but across Europe, we are already part of the circular economy. We're returning nutrients to soil, and we're already removing a lot of nutrients from the wastewater cycle. So next slide, please. So I was asked to speak about the ambitions for nutrients. So this is a postcard from the future. The year is 2040, and there are some key things that have changed in our world by this date. The first one is that with respect to nutrients, land, water, and air are equally protected. And I say that because I think there's some messages emerging today where we still have to do a bit of integration in our thinking. The next message from the future is that nitrogen and phosphorus from wastewater treatment are widely reused. And the third message is that demand for nitrogen and phosphorus from the local economy is strong, that there is demand for these materials. And I say local because clearly with the climate change of the future and the realities of not wanting to move long distance for raw materials, the local economy is very important. And lastly, the message from the future is that there is huge confidence in reused N&P products, that actually people are with us on this. In the future, this is the vision for reused and recovered materials. And the picture is just to put the circle and to make clear what the circular economy might be. So from people produce nitrogen and phosphorus, absolutely, it comes in urine and feces, goes to the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant of the future might look very different, and it might be doing different things, recovering nutrients, not only removing them from water. So wastewater treatment plant of the future might be functioning very differently. We will then possibly be working with new relationships. There's demand in the economy. The nutrients may be going to a form of industry. They may also be going to agriculture as they currently do. But those routes will probably look different. Those relationships will be different. Those working business relationships will likely be different. And of course, the products that industry makes and agriculture makes will go back to people. So that part of the circle will remain the same. But the recycling, that is the ambition for the future, certainly, I think, from my colleagues in the water sector, to see us move towards something like this. So that's the postcard from the future. That's the view of the ambition for nutrients. Next slide, please. So I was also asked to speak on implementation and improving nutrient management. And we've heard some of these already this morning, but for Eureau members, these 7 are absolutely essential. Policy coordination and a holistic approach at the EU level is vital, but we need it in order to establish the context for large-scale N&P reuse. And the large scale may be local in its action, absolutely, but it needs to happen at scale. I think the reality of needing to control nutrients in the environment, as well as not overstretch the nutrient resources that we have, and live within our limits. This is the ambition and why we need the coordination. I say as well that integrated nutrient management plans must include wastewater and must include the recovered and the reusable elements of nutrients. This is a very important element of any future integrated plan. Within Eureau, source control is a vital element. Source control to control pollutants so that they don't enter the wastewater chain. And we say this so that we can ensure the quality of N and P products in the future. We want to make sure that the quality of N and P products, along with other products you might get from wastewater, but that's another conversation. We want to ensure that they are free from unwanted elements that end up in the water cycle. So source control is a vital step on the implementation pathway. I think one thing we would need to talk more about, and it came up in the chat earlier, is that circular economy principles need to guide our adaptation of end of waste concepts. And I think there's a big conversation to be had there in the future. It needs to happen quite quickly because we need to make space for the new and emerging regulatory framework. As others have mentioned, there's many directives being reviewed at the moment and many policies within the EU are arising, and we need to bring all of these things together. Another principle is the new partnerships between wastewater operators and product manufacturers in order to bring nitrogen and phosphorus into reuse. And there may be many reuses. This is the point. Today, we don't know what all of the reuses might be. We obviously associate them with food and with food production, but there may be others. And we've heard as well this morning already from Katja about the importance of research and innovation, and I would absolutely support that. But for wastewater treatment, I would really encourage that the focus to enhance N&P removal is coupled with and married to energy efficiency and reducing our chemical dependency in order to recover N&P. These are huge challenges. It's a huge innovation gap, and we have to fill it. Currently, removing nitrogen in particular is incredibly energy intensive. If we are to take more out, then those technologies need to be very energy efficient. And finally, for the wastewater sector, the implementation element that it has to be there. And it has to be there on many fronts, but certainly on the recovery and the reuse element, is that we need both financing and financing instruments which can support and enable these shifts in the economy, these shifts in practice, and the shifts in consumer habits. A whole renewal cycle is needed. It must be supported by appropriate financing instruments. So last slide, please. Thank you very much for listening to Eureau today, and any questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. And now I will again hand over to Andrea for moderating a short round of questions and answers.
Thank you. And just to say, we've had a huge number of questions, so thank you very much for those, and thank you to our panelists who have been responding to some of them live. What we will do is those questions we don't get to, we will endeavour to answer those offline and circulate the answers with the notes. I'm just going to invite 3 more people to comment. So Mark Sutton has a question, and I will ask Tiffany to respond directly on his question, and also to pick up on the earlier questions around contamination in mineral fertilizers and also recycled materials. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I want to take the opportunity to thank Fertilizer Europe for your statement, Tiffany. I think it's a really important moment with Fertilizer Europe as an industry embracing the challenge to halve nutrient pollution. That is, I think, a very important step for our whole societal dialogue, that the industry is ready to go for it. I think in terms of your comment, you asked a comment, is this a national goal, regional goal, spatially varying? Well, I think from my perspective, I can answer this in relation to the Colombo Declaration, where we framed it last year as to halve nitrogen waste. and the emphasis on waste, in that all pollution is waste. And surely everybody wants to halve waste. Now, that was set in relation to national action plans. So every country has the opportunity to reduce waste. If you have no waste, you have no work to be done. And by waste, we mean all forms of nitrogen pollution, including denitrification to N2, because of course that's wasted nitrogen. As Sarah just mentioned, the high energy in these things means it's waste. So I think there's not an intention to reduce nitrogen fertilizer input in that target, but of course that is one of the outcomes. If we reduce the waste, we don't need so much input. And hopefully that's something that all can agree on. So my question to you then, Tiffany, is to take it back the other way, that in Europe, your industry, you're watching the politicians, and I see myself an interesting contradiction. The contradiction between, on the one hand, it's great to see the European Commission embracing the reduced nutrient pollution by 50%. That's wonderful. That's really brave. It's great. On the other hand, we sit in so many EU negotiations where many of the countries are quibbling. To get any progress on the National Emission Ceilings Directive is incredibly hard and incredibly slow. We have the Gothenburg Protocol renegotiation review coming up next month to start, where we might expect to see countries, on the other hand, being very unambitious. So my question to you from an industry perspective is, what do you think are the critical elements that are going to be needed to help others, in particular governments, embrace a high ambition approach?
Tiffany, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. I wouldn't pretend that I have the solution towards what European decision makers should do, and the rest of the panelists can also come forward later. But what I think is it's always between the carrot and the stick. And the NECD is more on the stick, but still we see a very low and slow implementation of the member states. And we expect that maybe with the Zero Pollution Action Plan, that can be an additional statement towards EU decision makers to understand the challenge of really bringing forward the improvements we need from water, air and soil, and putting everything into one context. Because the problem is that if we talk about clean air in the Gothenburg Protocol and clean water in the Water Framework Directive, it's not the same the same member state representatives, not the same experts. And we very well know how the nitrogen cycle works. And if you press on one button here, then you will have an impact somewhere else. And so the challenge is really to have a holistic approach. The Farm to Fork strategy is a way to get there. And if, as Andrea said in the chat, then member states are really requested to implement this target towards their national and regional needs, we hope to see an improvement. I hope I somehow replied to your question, Mark. To continue with other two questions that came in the chat in terms of recycling, I would like to underline that we have several member companies who already embarked on recycling as the negotiations around the fertilizing product came in, but already before. So Borealis, ICL, OCI and Yara, to name them, it's already 1/4 of our membership. So I would say we don't need to have a European recycling target or a national target to act, but we can already really work in practice towards contributing to circular economy. So more and more there is an interaction, and maybe the burden between organic and mineral fertilizer industry will become a bit blurred as time goes by. And finally, there are a question regarding contaminants, the fertilizing product regulation, which will apply as of July 2022. Those set a limit for the presence of cadmium in phosphorus fertilizers, whether they are of mineral or organic origin, but in terms of organomineral fertilizers, and 60 milligram limit has been considered as a level where there is no risk of accumulation in the soil. And in addition, there is, let's say, a motivation for the industry to bring forward products which contain a low cadmium content, because there is a possibility to use a voluntary cadmium label. And finally, in terms of uranium, the regulation is not saying nothing. There is the request to have a review to come after a couple of years of application of the regulation. I know of a review done in the context of the German Sustainability Board, a couple of years ago. It did show that there was no concern, and at the same time, it will be up to the EU Commission to assess it from a European perspective. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tiffany. Just finally, to round us off, I'd like to invite Lisa to come in, who's been waiting very patiently.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And thank you for this excellent presentation and invitation to discuss about this very, very important topic. I'm Lisa Pietola. I'm Doctor in Soil Sciences and Head of Environmental Affairs in MTK, which is a farmers' union in Finland. So good nutrient use efficiency is, of course, very important when we reduce losses, and we need to recognize the balanced nutrition of all elements, all essential elements after crop needs, and the national and regional differences. And my first question concerns phosphorus supply and its relation to nitrogen leaching, because for Finnish farmers, this is a very relevant question, because during last 30 years in Finland, we have decreased phosphorus fertilization from 40 kilos per hectare to about, it's around 12 kilos now on an average. And in my area here in southern Finland, the phosphorus balance has been negative for years. And this is due to the Finnish environmental program in CAP Pillar 2, which caused soil phosphorus mining and basically on crop farms without manure use. Thus, in my area, the phosphorus index is already getting weak. And the question is how phosphorus deficiency affects nitrogen leaching. Recalling the Justus von Liebig's minimum law, we can understand that the hypothesis that phosphorus deficiency decrease nitrogen use efficiency would be very relevant. And I would like to have some comments from you, and also regarding on this current EU policy. And the second question concerns organic nutrient sources and the right timing of application to increase the nutrient availability and use efficiency, to increase that efficiency for the crops, because we see that weather conditions, they affect microbes, which affect the nutrient plant availability. And so the question is how well you see that we can adjust the right time of nutrient supply for the crop uptake by organic sources to reduce losses. And the final question is how well in future we can guarantee the safety of organic paste fertilizers from recycled materials originally having organic harmful substances, because farmers should not be punished later on. Many thanks.
Okay, maybe I can answer you on the first question. I think it's very important, like I said already, that you measure the P in the soil. If there is if the P level is too low, you should apply more P, and this way the crops will grow better and will also stop the nitrogen leaching, or they will pick. They will have more nitrogen uptake and will have less nitrogen leaching. So it's really important to measure the P in the soil to know if you're below, in, or above the target P zone.
Yeah. Thank you. This is crucial to understand the crop need and not just looking that we need to decrease the phosphorus index, because we have now the kind of linear relation that the less you have phosphorus in soil, the less you have runoff or leaching. And this kind of attitude, it will end up the nitrogen leaching, yeah, if you can see.
Yeah,
what's my point? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Thank you.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, maybe to add about the P, I think one of the challenges is, of course, also what is a good index for this P, and all countries use different ones. Awesome P, mehlig P, Bray P, water P, ammonium lactate P, and whatsoever. and I have a couple of PhDs working on trying to improve this index much better. It's also in China a very, very important issue now. Okay. So I think that's one of the challenges. And how does that P level in the soil relate indeed to acceptable water quality? And they are trying also to use much better land use practices that maybe that critical P level could go, that target P for crop yield could go down a little bit, because that will also then lead to less erosion losses, etc., because the P level is lower in the soil. So there is still some challenges to be overcome here.
Okay, I think to have a cup of tea, we should stop the first session here. And I thank you all very much. I think we had very, very interesting presentations. I have seen a lot of questions going on in the chat that, and unfortunately we could not discuss everything and we could not answer all. So we will try, we will in any event take care of a summary of our webinar today. And we will try to address all your questions. And of course, many of you know each other, so you can also exchange directly. And we have at 11:30 a next session where we can continue. And it's about the input to the nutrient management plan. And